Let's talk about what some of the life expenses are that we can pre-plan for in order to give our kids financial freedom. Now, while we're going through this list, I want you to kind of think back to like your, I don't know, teenage years, 20s, 30s, a lot of the experiences that you had and what you had to go through to get where you are today. It's not just about making their lives easier. That's a byproduct of all of this. It's about disrupting a generational gap when it comes to understanding wealth and money. What do I mean by that? I grew up in a very middle class family. And you could say, I mean, this was the 80s and 90s. So there was more of a more robust middle class than there is today. We might have been on the lower end of middle class. That's a semantic that's really not important. My first car, my grandfather paid $50 for it. It had been wrecked. He was a mechanic. My dad was a mechanic. My grandfather put it back together. He painted it this god awful, like 13 different colors, all these lines and everything. It was so funny. People made fun of me everywhere I drove it, but I was still so happy to have a car. It broke down all of the effing time. It was like once a week. But that, I mean, that was the best that I was going to have. Your experience may have been different. I know for my kids, like my daughter, when she turns 16, depending on what vehicles are like by then or whatever Elon Musk decides to do, that when she gets in her car, I need it to be safe. I need to know that it's going to get her to point A from point A to point B with zero problems, that it's never going to break down on her. So I'm going to want a totally different car for her than I wanted for myself. That's just one example. Now, when we think about disrupting this generational wealth gap, like what I did with my first car is what my dad did, which is what my grandfather did. In fact, his first car, I don't even think he had one. He just went straight from being a hillbilly in Tennessee with no shoes in an outhouse to going over to Germany to fight in World War II. A little bit different dynamic for us today. A car is just one example. If we plan for it now, we can buy that $30,000 car a few years from now for half the price because we started saving for it now. The other expenses, like I went into the military to pay for college. You may, and I took out student loans to finish my bachelor's degree. You may have had that same experience, right? We've got educational plans for that. Some of the other expenses, other life expenses that we want to plan for. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk about how we plan for them. What are the instruments? What are the contributions that we make? Today, I want to get an understanding of what these life expenses are and why they're important. If we want to break that generational cycle of not understanding wealth, not having financial freedom, we need to really think through the big ones and plan out for them in advance. Now, our 529 account is going to pay for much of our education, but we do like to consider other education expenses. I had a partner when I was in the auction business in Washington, D.C., who both of his kids went to school up near Boston. And although they were different schools, they were about 45 minutes apart. So he was able, with his funds, to buy a house there where they could both live and then rent out the other 3 bedrooms to friends to pay the mortgage. They were there for 6 years because they were 2 years apart. And at the end of the time, they sold the house for a profit and the kids kept that money. So they lived for free. Then they sold the house. Dad got back what he put in. They kept the profit. And then they used that to buy their own houses. Like those are the things that we can plan for. Now that's a great extreme case, but some of the life expenses that we're going to plan for could be something like that when your kids go to the university, or it could just be books, or it can be other things that they need. And the next major life expense, typically after a car, and this has nothing to do with societal norms. It has to do with my experience, possibly your experience. In fact, mine might have been like you can move these around. This isn't necessarily about order. I bought my first house way before I ever got married, but we want to plan for a wedding and or a honeymoon. Why do I say and or? Some people are going to want a big wedding. Those are ridiculously expensive. I had friends in the past who went into debt to have a wedding and were divorced before they paid off the wedding. That sucks. Now, in my case, we decided instead of having a 400-person wedding to have like a 30-person wedding. And then we took the money that we saved and we used it to buy a rental property. We were going to use it for our honeymoon. Luckily, we were gifted our honeymoon, which was beautiful. Everyone's experience is different. What if your kids had a piggy bank that they could go to where they could say, hey, I've got $25,000 to plan a wedding with, without going in debt, more importantly, without interrupting your finances, your retirement, your debt payments, like giving them their own footing to make decisions off of, as well as the education to make the right decisions, allows them to be financially free. So we're going to plan for their wedding. We're going to plan for their honeymoon. The next thing is we want to give them the down payment on their first home. Now, knock on wood, if we do everything right, maybe it's more than a down payment. The two biggest problems that 20-somethings, even 30-somethings face today is they're so burdened by student loan debt, which we took care of with our 529 account, that they can never save up enough money to buy a home. We're going to break that cycle, and we're going to give them the money to pay for their education. We're going to give them the money to make a down payment on a home. We're going to give them their financial freedom to go out and start their lives much earlier than the last two generations have been able to do because of the way the system has been broken. I like to say that the American dream is not dead, it's just changed. And in order to meet some of those standards of the American dream, get married, buy a home, start a family, if that's what you want. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. And then even further on down the line, retire. You've got to be planning early. And unfortunately, we've got to plan so much earlier that we have to plan for our kids when they're babies now in order for them to live this American dream. And you know what, though? There's another factor to that. For us to live our American dream, meaning to work, to save, to retire, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're a professional, you work a 9 to 5, all of those dynamics make things a little bit different for each of us. But if you're not financially planning for your kids now, it's going to affect you and your retirement later. Unless you're an asshole of a parent and you just don't want to help your kids whatsoever, they're going to come to you for money to pay for an education. If you didn't plan for that in advance, you're going to try pulling it out of your current income. You're going to try pulling it out of the equity of your home. All of these things are going to have a negative effect on your ability to retire and have your own financial freedom later in life. So the planning for them is actually benefiting you. Once we get past the first home, we can get into some more of the intangibles is not the right word. Some of the other dynamics that they could or could not take advantage of in the future. What if they want to start their own business? I remember, and there's some advantages to bootstrapping, but my first successful business, I borrowed $6,500 from some partners, and I ended up creating a $5 million a year business out of that. But you know how much I had to give up because I was a 20-something coming from a lower middle class family. I had no assets. I had no money to do anything myself. I had no experience. I was stuck in this generational wealth gap where I didn't understand what the opportunities were. And I basically gave away the house in order just to get going. And that haunted me for years and actually led to a lot of problems with those partners. What if I had my own piggy bank that I could have gone to? $6,500 to me when I was in my early 20s was more money than I could ever imagine. And by 28, I had turned that $6,500 into a personal net worth of $1 million, but still, it could have been significantly more. I want my kids to have the freedom and the education, the training, and the mentorship to be successful in their own right without having to depend on other people. They may start a business. They may buy rental properties. Big part of my and my wife's portfolio is rental properties. All of those are now in a trust, and they're going to become the kids later in life. You need money to do those types of things. They're going to need money to do that. Now, they may never want to start a business. They may never want to buy a rental property. That's fine. They have these instruments. They're earning compound interest. They're continuing contributions. They could grow into a bigger and bigger retirement portfolio. Whatever it is that works for them in their life, we're going to provide it for them. Now, there are other life expenses that can come up along the way. There could be medical expenses. They could have a child with special needs and they need money. Think about how much easier. I want to be careful with easier. We're not making them weak-minded individuals. We're giving them the freedom to find their own path in life, find their own mission, really get into their passions, and really experience all that life has to offer them. And if we can give them a piggy bank where we contribute dollars today for them to have hundreds of dollars tomorrow, compound interest, everybody wins in that equation. We as parents win. The children win. How society wins. America wins when we do this. I know that sounds a little like I'm shouting from the rooftops, but really think about it. If we can empower an entire generation with financial freedom, the things that they'll be able to do when they're not burdened with a 9-to-5, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to figure out how to pay off their student loan debt, living in our effing basements because they can't afford to buy a home, delaying starting a life, whether that be with a family or out on their own because they just can't financially afford it. That financial freedom is going to change a generation of people. And the mission that we're on together is to make that happen. So the next couple videos are going to walk through the different instruments that we're going to use to accomplish this. But I wanted to talk to you about what these life expenses are and why it's important for us to be planning for them now. All right, check out the videos below. Remember, you can always contact your coach or me directly, and we'll help you navigate any problems you have getting all this stuff set up. Thank you.